Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Reducing Carbon Emissions in Commercial Interiors webinar series. This is the first of 10 webinars, and this one will look at where the carbon emissions are in buildings. There will be a series of 9 following sessions. The aim is to keep this really short. There's a couple of dates in there that you can book for the second and third, and we have the rest lined up to occur in coming months. It's all about where are carbon emissions, how can we actually improve them, what might that mean for how we design those spaces, some thoughts on metrics to use, how to calculate emissions, and a whole bunch of other topics in there that we hope you'll find valuable and use in your discussions with your clients, as well as with your fellow team members to help educate and spread the word around how reducing carbon in commercial interiors is not that difficult. It just needs some pretty good design. Introducing myself, I'm Greg Labrier, who'll be taking this series. I won't go into my qualifications, although I do have a PhD in green buildings back from the old days. If you could hold your questions to the end, please, that'd be really useful, please. And as I said, this video will be available to you. So let's get into it really. So the reason why carbon emissions is so important is obviously the world's warming and many organizations have commitments to net zero carbon. If you look at what that practically translates to in terms of actionable requirements, it means that every organization needs to reduce their carbon by 2030 by 50%. And by 2050 by 90 to 95%, according to the Science Based Targets Initiative standard around this. And that includes the entire supply chain. So this is a really big ask, and it means for a fit out, it means absolutely everything that's done in the fit out needs to be net zero carbon. That is on that pathway, and so by 2050, and some organisations have set a 2040 target, it needs to be at zero, including the embodied carbon and the operated carbon. But what does that really mean? So as a bunch of designers, landlords, serviced office providers, occupiers, agents, we all need to understand what net zero really means in terms of a building. So the question we set ourselves is, well, where are the carbon emissions in a building? And let's stick to commercial buildings, but let's not just think about upfront, but let's think about the entire lifetime of the building. And so our research led us to this piece of this study done admittedly a little while ago, and so we've triangulated this with some more research, which I'll put to you in a minute. So hopefully everyone can see this commercial building lifetime greenhouse gas emissions. What Treloar found in his research, which was a really rigorous bottom-up analysis, and encourage you to have a look at the paper on that website link there as well, is that actually furniture is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And so let me talk you through this graph, and I'd hope that you would use this graph with others to explain the situation, because it's very handy, and there's tons of sort of useful messages within this. So furniture at 30% is so high because roughly on average, in Treloar's research, every 6.5 years, the furniture is completely sent to landfill. That was his assumption, which I think largely holds true given the very small reuse rates. And we see that today with 300 tons of office furniture go to landfill every single working day in the UK. That's that thought bubble there. And then interestingly, if you start to unpack some of the other sources of emissions within a building, you've got operational energy as the number 2 source, and then you go around with those different colors there, which I've color coded. And so if we unpack the color coding, the blue, everything there in the sort of royal blue color, that relates to the fit out, and that's 43%. So if we're designing fit outs, it doesn't matter what the building structure does, and if we retain the building structure, that's great. But as designers of interiors, that then gives us the opportunity to influence a very large proportion of that building's greenhouse gas emissions, especially if we're not touching the structure. So it's really quite a significant figure there. The yellow there is the building structure. The green is the olive green is the building services. There's some other in there, and operational energy. If we move to the next sort of column of breakdown here, or roll up on the right hand side, we get a split here between operational emissions, which is only 30%. However, that entertains a lot of thinking around, should we put solar panels on? Should we put energy efficient lighting in? And the answer to all of those is, of course, yes, you should. But actually, a greater proportion of the emissions within a building over its lifetime come from the embodied carbon, which is the
emissions that go into moving, making, extracting, and shaping all of the different bits of things that go inside an office. And obviously furniture is the biggest component of those. So that's really insightful. Now, do we believe that 1999 figures are still valid? And another way to look at that question is, when you're presenting this to others, that will be the first question that comes up. Oh, these figures are old. Do we believe that? So if we do, first of all, a sort of reality check on that, what's happened since 1999? We've got a lot more LEDs and low energy machinery going into our buildings. So you would hope that the operational energies come down proportionally. However, the embodied energy within furniture hasn't changed very much because it's still largely made from virgin resources. And then most of the other elements of this really haven't changed very significantly, except perhaps some of the different regimes we have around internal walls. And remember, in 1999, they were still very much in the partition days, but we would expect then there's probably a few more walls come along since then, but then they've probably disappeared as we've moved to open plan as well. So that gives us, at a sort of very high level, a reasonable degree of confidence. The other thing we did here is, on this next slide, we had a look at the Arup analysis they did for the World Business Council on Sustainable Development in a really handy report that only really deals with, unfortunately, the upfront emissions. That is the emissions that occur from when you start building a building to when you then move in on the first day. And their analysis shows that actually, and they use a 5S approach, which is sort of layers, if you like. So structure is the innermost, followed, and then skins on the outside, then space plan, etc., and you move in to services that way. What they found is that this is the upfront analysis. Now, they also, in that very same paper, described all the different numbers of lifetimes that they have for those different levels of S within the building. And unsurprisingly, they've recognized that furniture these days is replaced roughly every 5 years. And so if we then multiply through those numbers by those number of life cycles, what happens is that 5%, which is the stuff, which furniture is one of the biggest components of that, then blows out to a much more significant proportion, and the structure really stays at that sort of number, but is not multiplied over multiple structure changes. However, the skin, for instance, you've got to double the skin footprint because that's changed on average 30 years according to Arabs. So this is another way to look at those original 1999 numbers and get a fair degree of confidence that the proportions are roughly right. So that's the analysis we're bringing to you today, and we're presenting. Let's remember that's it for the first 15 minutes. We did say this was a short webinar. What we're going to do is go into questions, but please remember this is designed to be followed by, on the 15th of November, a second session on, well, how do we cost effectively reduce those emissions now that we know what they are? What does that mean in terms of a workspace, in terms of what it looks like, very much a design question, and then what might a larger campus look like, and these topics then roll on from there.